was born and raised in London, Ontario. The city at the time was a population of about 75,000. I had 4 younger brothers. I was the oldest, of course, and went through the school system, was a Boy Scout, had after school jobs most of my time in the going to high school, including setting pins at a bowling alley from 7 in the evening till 11:30, getting home half hour later. Once I was close to graduating from high school, I knew I wasn't going to be going to university just because of the family income. So, and I didn't know what I really wanted to do. My guidance counselor said, well, you're really good at math, so you'll probably get a job at a bank. And that didn't appeal to me. So here I was a week before finishing high school and still no idea what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to get away from home. On the way home one day from the job as an office boy, I had to finish at 6. There was a sign in this recruiting unit, the Canadian Air Force. Make $5,888 after 1 year of training. I thought, wow, I don't think my dad makes that much now, and he's been working for the railroad for 35 years. So I dropped in the next afternoon and said, what's this all about? And said, well, we need navigator and pilot trainees, and are you interested? If so, we'll give you an aptitude test right now. So I said, well, yes. Did the aptitude test and said, yes, you would make a good candidate. And I said, well, so what comes next? I said, well, we could send you for a medical. So they scheduled the appointments with the doctor for the following week. I went home and told my dad, Dad, I'm joining the Air Force. He was sitting out in the backyard having a beer. He said, no son of mine is joining the Army. I said, it's not the Army, Dad, and it's going to be a good job. And we left it at that. So the following week, went for the medical exam, hearing test. Result went back to the recruiting unit, I guess, the next day, and I get a call. Well, the call was at my grandmother's house across the road because we didn't have a phone. And they said, yes, you're selected. Contact us for the next move. So I went down the next day and they said, okay, this was toward the last week of June. He said, after July 1st, which is a national day in Canada, Canada's birthday, said you report to Crumlin Air Base, which was the name of the RCF station at the local airport, and sign in and they'll tell you what comes next. While we were training in Winnipeg, I met this lovely girl from Saskatchewan with long red hair. I was hooked. After about 6 months of courting, she was in nurses training at one of the local children's hospital in Winnipeg. And we used the flight cadets mess at Winnipeg. Had a dance almost every Saturday night. I took up about it's called a secondary duty, so the man that we were working for now said, all right, you two fellows are going to become the editors of the base newspaper magazine, which comes out once a month. Before I know it, we were taking turns writing the monthly editorial in the front of the magazine. So that was my start at writing. Anyway, we made the decision to resign from the Air Force and return to civilian life. I moved to my present home in Orangeville, Ontario, which is, here I did a lot more writing. The local newspaper, a weekly, was just starting up. I said, well, you want me to write some articles for you? I'll see what I can do. I'll do it and you can decide if you want to use them. So I did interviews with new businesses setting up in town. And got about one every 2 weeks, nice article. And that's when I decided that I can write satire. So I wrote a few columns, gave them to the wife of the owner of the paper, and said, oh, this is really good. I retired at 60, mandatory at the time, and 2 months later, my wife and I bought a fifth wheel, a diesel truck to tow it, and started heading for Arizona for 5 months each winter. And we were there the year that 9/11 took place, which was 2001, September 9, 2011, Day of Infamy. I was quite upset by that because I had friends with United Airlines and they lost 2 crews. There was a lot of information floating around at the time about how these Islamic terrorists got to fly airplanes. Well, there was word that on the internet and in the news that they learned to fly. So I thought, well, there must have been some way they lived and survived under the radar in the States for a couple of years. How did they get the money to do that? Where were they living? I thought there might be a story here, a fictional story about how they did that. So that was the birth of my idea for Deadly Diversions. Well, having decided that I'll try a book, I've never written a book obviously, but I was pretty sure I could do it. Started it probably in 2003. I put it down a number of times, started it up again 6 months, 8 months later, and finally got a final draft in 2007. Editor's number. Never knew who he was. I'm surmising he was an English teacher or a professor, and this was a sideline business for him. He said, usually I can tell after 5 pages of a script that it's not going to go anywhere. I read your whole book. I was so impressed. You mentioned the character, the protagonist, the never having been done plot, and at the end he said, and with your protagonist and some other characters, there's a chance for a sequel. And so I was elated at that stage. That was the next step. I sent out 10 query letters to, and the fellow who did the bit about the viability check said, you'll probably have to self-publish. I never did figure out why he said that, but it was true. So that's when I went online, found Author House, contacted them, got a price, and sent my manuscript to them to be printed, cover design and all that. And they sent me back the printed manuscript. And I started buying books and trying to sell them. Well, the readers that I sold the books to personally, a number of them at the park that we were spending the winter in Arizona, said, yeah, this is really gripping, and wow, that probably could have happened. And I said, well, as I say, it's fiction, but nobody's proven any different at the moment. I was encouraged by responses to a number of people. I ended up selling 500 copies myself, some of them through Author House. As I said, I got 1 royalty to Author House, and we'll show you a picture of the check. After my experience with Deadly Diversions and selling a number of books and getting a number of good reviews from various sources, friend said, well, why don't you write another book? This was so good. Shadows on the Flag, although not an exact result of 9/11, a fictional account of terrorists still under the radar wanting to hit the U.S. again and how they might be going about it. So it works out that the same protagonist plus a few more characters. I get a lot of comments about my characters from the reviewers, which is very impressive for me that I'm picking good characters, put it that way. So the good thing about Shadows on the Flag, once I finished it, there was a book publishing company right in Tucson, Wheatmark Publishers. I went to see the boss, said, I've got a book here, my second book. I showed him the Deadly Diversions. He said, oh yeah. I said, I sold quite a few copies myself. And that was the death of that, and I think that was 2011. And I had both books in, I think 3 bookstores in Tucson at one time, without real publicity. Just another book on the shelf. I'd go back in the spring or the next winter. And then along came my wife's illness, 2013. She came home and was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, lung cancer. Well, that was the end of me writing from 2014 to COVID hit, and all of a sudden there was interest from various, I guess you call them agents, around the time 2000, that was the birth of COVID, saying, now that people are shut in, there's a big market for ebooks. We would like to republish your books for the ebook market, and for a minimum sum. One was in Florida, Ocala, Florida. They didn't go very far. They're advertising, and after COVID was over, I started getting a lot of calls from people looking for books like mine to do something with, adapt. So having turned down a couple of other feelers from agents, one I almost sold the copyrights for both books to one. I said, well, all right, put it up for a feeler. Came back, they would have given me $2,500 for each book, a total of $5,000. I said, no thanks, I'll hang on for something better. That's the last I heard from them. And Willis Hamilton came along, nice agent, a little more professional sounding, no big promises, but interesting books, both books, and the rest hopefully will be history. Did I write 24 hours a day? No. I would write a couple hours probably, and then I would come to an end of a scene, for instance, and I'd just make a note. This was on a laptop. What comes next, and I'd give a few words, and that's where I'd start the next time. And that's how I put it all together. I kept a chart about what happened on what date, because I wanted to make sure it flowed. I didn't go back on something. That was very helpful. I got one around too, a great big cardboard thing with time frames and what comes next. And basically both books, I knew I had to have an impact type of start, and I should have at least a pretty good idea how it was going to end. I could build the tree in between with scenes and whatnot. I guess the most important part, or what I concentrated on, make sure that if I'm writing about something in London or Paris, it's an actual location. Don't make up stuff. Having been there, done that, adds to the authenticity and believability of the plots. As far as what a reader might think of both these books, I hope that they find it entertaining, different, in other words, They haven't read about a plot like this before, and in the case of Deadly Virgins, might leave them thinking, well, that could be partially true. They would tell somebody, this is a good book, it's different, and I bet you'd read it. You'd like it, and pass it on to a sibling or a relative or a friend. As to the future, I don't have any plans to write. We'll see what happens with the London Book Fair.